Hi, it's your host, Jules. Let's go. Welcome back, everybody, to your host, Jules True Crime. I'm your host, Jules. If you like ethics focused, victim centered true crime told by a credentialed victim advocate, you are in the right place. If you are new here and you want some more of the Low to No Banter podcast, go ahead and make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening or watching because I do strive to post weekly stories for you listening and watching. Either way, I'm glad you found your way here. I'm Jules, and let's go. Today, I'm going to take you back to the nation's most expensive robbery to date. So, in 1990, in Boston, Massachusetts, at the Stewart Gardner Museum, when in just 81 minutes, 13 pieces of art were stolen and have never been seen since. Now, this is the story of the Great Boston Art Heist and how the men or women responsible walked away with over $500 million worth of art without a single shot being fired, zero casualties, and a museum desperate for answers. This case remains unsolved today and without any official suspects. We'll dive deep into the actual heist and details behind it, what was stolen, the FBI's investigation, and wild rumors and theories. So let's see what we can find out, shall we? The Art Museum and the Stewart Gardner Museum, aptly named after its founder in 1898, a renowned art collector named Isabella Stewart Gardner. Isabella, who lived from 1840 to 1924, was known for her vast interest and passion for art, specifically fond of the 15th century Venetian palace style, which is why, when you see images or when you visit the Stewart Gardner Museum in person, you'll notice how heavily influenced the art collections and more specifically, the architecture and design of the actual museum building was influenced by such. It is actually quite beautiful to see, you guys. And although she was educated in New York for her primary education, she did finish her later secondary education overseas. And this is where she met her husband, Jack Gardner. Jack and Isabella would go on to be married back in New York, with Isabella being just 19 at the time. And this is how we find Isabella in Boston, Massachusetts, because her husband, Jack, was from Boston. So after their ceremony, the newlyweds settled in his home state and actually lived in a home which Isabella's father gave to them as a wedding gift. That's a great wedding gift. Although next, a traumatic event in Isabella's life will change the course of her life, and thus will eventually bring her to her passion of art. In 1863, just 3 years after they wed, Jack and Isabella welcomed a sweet baby boy that they named John Lau Gardner III, which they affectionately nicknamed Jackie. According to the museum's official website, gardnermuseum.org, sweet baby Jackie passed away just 2 years later from pneumonia. A year after that, Isabella would suffer a miscarriage and was advised by her doctor that she would not be able to have any more children. And in 1865, her husband Jack's brother tragically died, and Isabella and Jack would go on to step in to raise their 3 nephews. But just a few years after baby Jackie's tragic death, Isabella's doctor encouraged Jack to take her abroad for her mental health, which maybe now we can infer was likely a very taboo topic back in 1867. And what began next was the rest of her life. And that was a life as an explorer of cultures, architecture, art, literature, and history. The couple would not go on to have any other children of their own, but she poured herself into her journals, which detailed her travels and experiences and people met in places like Egypt and Asia. She was keen to spend her time with intellectual scholars and formed a respectful relationship with Charles Eliot Norton, a prominent scholar who was Harvard's first art history professor. Interesting fact. And as we stated in the opening, over $500 million worth of art was stolen from Isabella's museum. And it was $500 million worth of art from her very own private collection, her own foundation. And knowing now that Isabella moved to a well-to-do district in Boston, was given a house by her father, was very well traveled and befriended and very well-known scholars during the time of Harvard's scholarly art birth. This means Isabella's community was full of people to nourish and feed her passions and curiosities, especially at a time when it was very much a dominantly male oriented circle. Jack and Isabella sponsored a promising young Harvard student with a passion for literature to travel to Florence. Now, his name was Richard Berenson, and while he was there, he realized his true passion was that of Italian Renaissance art, and it's then that the Wagners named him their chief art advisor. Now, I am left to wonder if Jack and Isabella thought of Richard as a son. Their own son, Jackie, would have been about the same age as he was. Now, sadly, while Richard was acquiring art pieces for Isabella's collections, her husband Jack suffered a heart attack, and in 1898, he sadly passed away. And because they planned together and dreamed to jointly open the museum, Isabella still went on with her goals and continued to build the museum. It would ultimately open in 1903. Now, interestingly, there was a fourth floor living quarters, and although construction was completed in 1901, Isabella would often stay for extended periods of time on the fourth floor during her stays, and she would design displays, rearrange, and care for her private collections on her own until her death. According to the museum's website, Isabella did die in 1924, but she stipulated in her will that the museum shall remain, quote, for the education and enjoyment of the public forever, end quote. And the website, though, does continue to say that, quote, she provided an endowment to operate the museum, stipulating in her will that nothing in the galleries shall be changed and no items be acquired or sold from the collection, end quote. For most of her collection, Isabella purchased under her own name and for herself. However, it wasn't uncommon for Isabella to have to rely on male colleagues to purchase in their names, as many dealers were not accustomed to doing business with women. And here we go. Could this stipulation be why certain pieces were ultimately stolen? Would there ever have been a heist of this magnitude if the pieces were ever offered at auctions? We will go into which pieces were taken and analyze why others weren't, even if they were worth way far more than the pieces that were taken. Could it be that these thieves were for hire to take certain pieces to fuel a certain collector's desires of a certain artist? Now, the beauty of art, we know, is ultimately in the eye of the beholder. Yet the monetary value is assessed and publicized for all to see. So was this a crime of passion for art or money or both? It was common knowledge that the museum took a big financial hit after Isabella's death in 1924. And according to the Smithsonian Magazine website, an article by journalist Nora McGreevy titled, What to Know About the Stewart Gardner Museum Heist, reports, quote, by 1990, the museum's security flaws were common knowledge among Boston's criminal elite, making it a bit of a sitting duck for a heist, per The Guardian, end quote. Now let's go to the year the robbery took place, 1990. Now, by this time, the museum is not the only building in the neighborhood, as it was for most of the time during Isabella's life. It would host galas, artists, and many events promoting art. On March 18th, 1990, at 1:24 a.m., two night security guards are on duty as usual at the museum when two police officers approach the door and talk to the guards through the museum intercom outside. And they inform the museum guards that they've been called to check on a disturbance reported to be coming from inside the museum. Now, it's St. Patrick's Day in Boston. So this does seem very plausible to the guards. And with noting the police uniforms, the guards choose to go against security protocol and buzz the officers in. This choice would likely be one of the worst ones made in art history, for as the two police officers entered, they overtook the security guards and duct taped their eyes and mouths closed, then separated them and chained them to pipes in the basement. According to the museum's head of security and chief investigator named Anthony Amore, quote, they come directly to this room, the Dutch room, 609. We believe that the point of the theft was to get the works by the Dutch artist Rembrandt. In fact, every other museum in Massachusetts with Rembrandt paintings had been robbed before us. The empty frame on the wall opposite the doorway held the only seascape Rembrandt ever painted. End quote. As you can imagine, the rooms in the museum were divided by origins and the coordinating art was displayed in the room. So, assuming that the thieves knew exactly what they were after in relation to the previous robberies of Rembrandt's, does this mean that we can connect clues from the previous robberies? Is there a common thread to pull it all together? This specific Rembrandt was called Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee. And it also happens to be the only one that Rembrandt painted his own face into this religious scene. And today's estimated worth of this piece is well over $100 million. The two thieves will spend a total of 40 minutes. You heard me. 40 minutes in the Dutch room. And the damage? They intended to take 6 Rembrandts. Now, I intentionally said intended because this is what happened. One painting, which was formerly commonly mistaken as a Rembrandt, was actually proven to have been painted by a student of Rembrandt's, which led the chief inspector, Anthony Moore, to infer, quote, the thieves aren't exactly scholars. They don't keep up with the museum's research, end quote. Could this be true? And would this help to profile the thieves? So that leaves the thieves with 5 Rembrandts. One they took 5 minutes to unscrew from the small frame, 3 other canvases sitting face up now on the floor, and one leaning against the wall, facing the wall. The thieves use a type of knife, possibly maybe like a box cutter, to remove the canvases from the frames. And it's widely noted in numerous reports how horrific the cutting job was for all who appreciate and respect art. The frames were nicked and gashed, and this may also play into the profiling of the thieves. You know, if they weren't seemingly concerned about taking their time or being caught, yet they carelessly handled the artwork and recklessly cut the canvas from the frames, does this mean that they weren't true art enthusiasts? Was it just money driven, perhaps a for hire job? The thieves take 4 Rembrandts, one assumed Rembrandt, which recall was not actually Rembrandt, and another rare painting by another artist named Vermeer called The Concert, which, if you're counting along, it means that we're missing 1 Rembrandt, and that's because the thieves left it behind, which has been assumed by accident. And it was the one Rembrandt that they took off the wall and leaned against the wall, and it was facing the wall away from them. Did they simply forget to take it? The backing on that artwork was reported by the museum to have made it look like an empty frame from the back, as if it was different from the others. Did the thieves just look it over and move on? And this piece, it was a self-portrait by Rembrandt. In this room, the thieves also work really, really hard to remove a Chinese object. Although they pass through the Chinese room with display cases full of incredibly more valuable pieces, they take nothing. This Chinese object, it was called a gu. It was bronze and it was from the 12th century. Was this an impulse grab? Was it off script? The last piece they stole was in the bottom floor. But the museum doesn't know the steps that were taken because the sensors did not track the movements of the thieves like it did in the other rooms of the museum. The thieves did approach the museum security center and remove the printed out patterns made by the sensors, but the staff was simply able to hit reprint and obtain the movements again. Go staff, go. It is noted by the museum how this robbery as a whole just doesn't seem cohesive within itself. The stealing of random items such as a flag of Napoleon was attempted, yet it appeared that the thieves could not get the screws out of the fabric, and instead of breaking the glass, they just took an eagle statue from the flag and left the rest. In total, 13 pieces of art were taken, and I will make sure that we go ahead and share all of the artwork as this story goes on so you can see for yourselves which ones were taken. And don't forget to follow me on social media, Instagram at Your Host Jules and Facebook at Your Host Jules True Crime, because I will post all these photos on my social media for you to see. But you need to see for yourself. I say that because these pieces are incredible. They are actually amazing pieces. Now, these two thieves had to make two different loads with the art to their car, which in itself also shows how non worried and non concerned they were with being caught. They exited the same way they entered. And don't forget, the museum guards are still handcuffed to pipes in the basement. So we need to talk about these security guards. The first one is Rick Abbott. Now, Rick was young. He was just 23 at the time. And he tells NPR that, quote, at the time of the robbery, I had just dropped out of Berklee College of Music. I was playing in a band and working night shift at the museum, end quote. And he goes on to explain, quote, I was just this hippie guy who wasn't hurting anything, wasn't on anybody's radar. And the next day, I was on everybody's radar for the largest art heist in history, end quote. Now, talk about a major life shift. Your name is now synonymous with this famous art heist, and it's not until years later that Abbott was genuinely cleared as a suspect of this crime. Years later. Now, let's talk why he was even a suspect in the first place. Well, the obvious. He was there. He was the one who buzzed the police impersonators, aka the thieves, into the museum. And these aren't well trained security guards, y'all. These are mostly older men or college students working part time. They're not trained like law enforcement. They're not equipped with the training or the skills to handle this type of situation. And personally, I think that falls on the responsibility of the museum and not on the guards at all. You hire someone to do a job, you expect them to do it to a certain level, then you need to adequately train them for it or hire individuals pre-qualified and also pay for their skills. Neither of these were done. Abbott was there about a year as a graveyard shift security guard, making about $7.25 an hour, and he was a self-proclaimed long-haired music hippie who sometimes came to work high. He still claims to this day that all he did wrong was let the criminals in thinking they were cops. However, he also put in his 2 weeks notice right before the robbery. And back to the same Smithsonian article, it brings up a really curious point. The prosecutor who took over the museum theft, a man named Robert Fisher, released security footage from the night before the theft footage he found in the files obtained from the original FBI investigation. Quote, Abbott's role in the drama once again came under scrutiny in 2015 when the United States Attorney's Office in Massachusetts released a rare security camera video. The grainy footage shows Abbott, who was on guard during the day of March 17th, opening the same side doors used by the thieves and admitting an unidentified man in a waist-length coat and an upturned collar, as the Times reported, end quote. So I tried to dig into this some more, and here's what I found. The FBI won't disclose whether this footage was seen in the initial 1990 investigation, and I am led to believe that it's because they're not sure. The article does, however, go on to say that behind the scenes, they tried so hard to find the identity of the man in the video, but have been unable to do so, thus explaining why they released the video to the public. I mean, it can't be a good look for Abbott to do so, and obviously the authorities would track Abbott's financial trails, and since he's not a suspect, they clearly have nothing tangible to tie to him. Multiple news outlets, including the New York Times, report that Abbott was fully cooperative with police, being interviewed without legal counsel, and we don't know if this was because he was young and just didn't know better, but he also took and passed 2 lie detector tests. Now, things to note. There are no images of the 2 cops, just Abbott's word. Abbott was duct taped very oddly, and this is a point of heated debate among internet sleuths on forums dedicated to this heist. And here's why. It's weird. The tape looks like it's wrapped around his head like a vintage toothache commercial, where it goes like this. The tape goes from the top of his head, under his chin, then across his eyes. It is bizarre. But it is also noted that in comparison to the other guard, Abbott was seemingly very calm and otherwise noted not traumatized. Although I challenge that comparison, I don't think that assessment is one you can entertain unless you're a professional and unless you're Abbott himself. And people respond differently to different situations. However, and this is a big however, many forums ask the same question. Why was Abbott not more disheveled if he was bound for 7 hours? His mouth was not covered. His left ear was not covered. The duct tape around his ankles was not stretched. It was like he just took it for 7 hours because they weren't discovered until the next morning. And then he just accepted it. Well, I live here now. And in the crime scene photos, there is a swift pocket knife open behind him. There are conflicting reports about whether or not he had duct tape over his handcuffs as well. This is important because it's used in an argument about whether or not he tied himself up. If he used the knife to cut strips of duct tape and then to tie his feet and face with it, then he used the handcuffs himself. However, duct tape over the cuffs would indicate someone else helped tie him up. And this is all to go over these minute details to corroborate his account. Why were the guards separated? The guards were not discovered until the next shift, when the next shift entered at 8 a.m. and then they called the police. And who was the other guard? Well, the other guard was on rounds with Abbott Buzz the Thieves Inn. And this guard's name was Randy Heston. Randy was said to have been incredibly traumatized and scared, which really highlighted how nonchalant Abbott seemed in comparison. Randy was just 25 years old at the time, and he has not been scrutinized like Abbott has been over the years. Were there any suspects? Yes and no. There were never any suspects charged. But the FBI did come out and name 2 suspects in 2015, both of which had died within 1 year of the robbery. According to the Smithsonian article, quote, George Reisefelder and Leonard DiMuzio, 2 associates of the late mobster Carmelo Merlino, both resembled police sketches of the criminals and died within 1 year of the heist. The investigators also said they suspected the art was transported via organized crime networks to Connecticut and the Philadelphia region, where the thieves attempted to sell the works on the black market. After those attempted sales, however, the artwork's trail goes cold, end quote. I wanted to find out the cause of death for the 2 suspects, and of course, I had questions like, were these men matched after a connection to organized crime was made? Was it because they looked similar to the sketches and were known mobster affiliates? It turns out that Reisfelder died from a drug overdose and DiMuzio was murdered. Merlino, the organized crime boss, died in 2005 from diabetes complications. Of course, anytime you hear about a cause of death for anyone involved with organized crime, it would be amiss if you didn't take it with a grain of salt. So, do we think there was an inside man on the job? In a 2021 article from the Boston Public Library by Bagot titled, quote, Boston's Greatest Unsolved Mystery, the Gardner Museum Art Heist, end quote, Bagotti asked some really important questions, which allude to the thieves having an inside man. It asked, quote, how did the thieves know where the time security alarm printouts were? How did they know when the alarm went off in the museum that it wouldn't alert the police? The average art heist takes 10 minutes, so why did they take so long? Why were they confident enough to take 2 trips to their car? End quote. So there was an internal alarm which went off? Yes. Yes, and it was an alarm that just notifies the museum goers that they are too close to an artwork. It was just an internal alarm. How did they know not to panic, though? That's a great question, because the alarm goes off in the very beginning where they started in the Dutch room, and then they were in the museum another 70-something minutes after that, clearly not concerned at all about getting caught. How did they know it was just an internal alarm and it wouldn't notify police? Well, here's the thought. What if there was an inside man and his only job was to let them in and get away with it? But so much focus has been on that, and it's taken focus away from the why while they fixate on the how. I know the how can help profile and catch people. We know that, absolutely. But what if there was an inside man? But it's only 1% of this case. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that there were recent neighboring thefts of other Rembrandt artwork. In fact, the chief of security, Anthony Moore, co-authored a book titled Stealing Rembrandt's Untold Stories of Notorious Art Heists, in which he discusses 81 of the stolen Rembrandt pieces, including the pieces from this case. An article from artnews.com by Milton Esteru says this about the book, quote, The total number of art thefts is 81, although the authors point out that the list is incomplete because thefts are not always made public. The figure does not include Rembrandts stolen by the Nazis during World War II. Even Rembrandt's former house in Amsterdam, where he lived between 1639 and 1658, had been burglarized twice. End quote. Let's talk theories. We already dove into the inside man job and touched on the organized crime routes. But the most likely, Boston gangsters looking to get something valuable to trade prisoners for. Netflix released a multi-part documentary series in 2021 on this exact case called This is a Robbery, the World's Biggest Art Heist. Now, in this documentary, a very interesting point is brought up that I wanted to close with. Shelley Murphy with the Boston Globe says, quote, "In the Dutch room, there was a secret panel. There's actually a door there that leads downstairs that was slightly ajar when the investigators arrived that morning, which also raised the question, who would know there was a door there?" End quote. And that's not all. She continues on with skepticism aimed at the one security guard in question. Quote, "The chaise tortoni is the only piece that was stolen on the first floor of the Blue Room, and the only person that the hard drive can show whose steps went into that room were those of Richard Abbott." End quote. So what do you think? Do you think the art will ever be recovered? 90% of art heists are inside jobs. Did you know that? I didn't know that. And most artwork is recovered a generation later. So where is the artwork? Now, you are invited to go to the museum today. It is open to the public, and you'll notice that the museum has honored the late founder, Isabella's wishes. No artwork should be moved, added, or sold. So where the artwork, which was taken, used to be, now it's just an empty frame and empty placeholders. Now, there is currently a $10 million reward for information leading to the recovery of all 13 missing pieces from the museum. I'm going to release an interview I had with the writer and director of the hit film Any Day Now. It is a new fictionalized version of what they believe may have actually occurred during this art heist. The film is called Any Day Now. I've seen it. It's absolutely incredible. And I had such a great conversation with the director who has grown up around this museum and is especially fascinated by it. So you'll want to come back and we'll learn a little more because he has some great inside knowledge for us. This has been your host, Jules True Crime. Hey guys, I'm your host, Jules. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate you listening and learning and growing with me here. Until next week, remember, no is a complete sentence. Bye, guys. Hey guys, it's Jules. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please rate and review wherever you are watching or listening. It sure helps me continue to grow and do what I'm doing here at your host, Jules True Crime. And we hope to see you back here next time. But until then, remember, no is a complete sentence. I'm your host, Jules. I'll see you later.
Fire Eyes Media.